to give you an example of what I think of as a high-impact, low-maintenance garden. And this is actually a garden in front of my home in Kennebunk, Maine. It's a combination of a number of different types of plants. You see there a blue spruce. That is a dwarf, very slow-growing spruce called Sester's dwarf. And then right next to it is a bright red perennial. The name of that perennial is Crocosmia lucifer. And then in front of those two, that shimmering yellow green leaf plant, that's a pagoda dogwood called Golden Shadows. It's hardy to 30 to 40 degrees below zero. It has lovely white flowers in the spring and then great berries in the fall for the birds. And then finally in the front of the border, that bright pink flower, that's actually an annual called Supertunia Vista Fuchsia. And that annual will continue blooming right into fall, no deadheading, and one plant can cover up to 3 to 5 square feet. So that's one plant that I allowed to just kind of ramble in and play nicely with all the other plants in the front of that border. Okay, hey, thank you. Don't you just love a glitch in the very first of my webinars? Is everyone just clapping out there that we actually have a slide up and it's moving?
We're getting some great comments. Yay, that's it. I see it. Good.
Yay.
Awesome.
Okay. Hey, thanks for staying with me, team. I really appreciate it. So here we go again. Let's look at this picture that you're finally seeing in front of my home in Kennebunk, Maine. That's a blue spruce I mentioned earlier. It's called Sester's dwarf. Very short, very compact. Basically, we're taking a majestic Colorado blue spruce, we're shrinking it down, and we have this lovely compact, under 6 feet tall spruce for year-round interest. Next to that is a bright red perennial, flowering perennial called Crocosmia lucifer. And then in front of those two, that beautifully tiered variegated shrub you see there, that is a pagoda dogwood. It blooms in the spring with lovely white flowers and then has great fruit for the birds in the fall. And one of the best things, this dogwood is hardy to 30 to 40 degrees below zero. I mean, talk about a superhero plant. And then finally, in front of that brilliant pink flower you see, that is an annual called Supertunia Vista Fuchsia. And this annual will bloom right into fall, needs Zippo deadheading, I never touch it, and it'll cover 3 to 5 square feet. So what you see there in the front of my border, that's 1 4-inch pot. I put in the ground, and then I just let it sweep in among all the other perennials in that area to create a glorious display right into October. Now, I mentioned that you're going to see more pictures of my garden shortly, and you're going to see actually a number of the perennials in this combination that will be featured in the Radical Perennials webinar. So at this point, I'm going to turn off the camera, and we are going to jump into Radical Perennials. Stay tuned. Do you see the next picture? Yes. You must be, otherwise Monica would be jumping in. All right, let's go through a few housekeeping notes before we get into the individual photos. You're listening today using your computer speaker system by default. If you prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio panel and the dial information will be displayed. You have all joined this webinar in listen-only mode. That's why I didn't hear you all shouting when the screen wasn't changing, which means that your microphone is muted. This will ensure a smooth flow during the presentation. In the unlikely event you're having difficulties joining this webinar, please go to the attendee invitation that you received and call the 800 number on that. By the way, that smiley little face you see in the picture, that is that's a little cute face I put on an oak tree, and that's a climbing hydrangea that's sweeping up that oak tree with white lace cap flowers, framing the little gnome face. You will all have the opportunity to submit questions by typing these in the questions section of the attendee control panel. You can send in questions at any time. We're going to collect them and then address them at the end of the Q&A session. The hand-raising feature has been disabled in the interest of, once again, creating a smooth flow for this webinar. The Q&A session is going to last for about 10 minutes. I'm going to answer as many questions as I can verbally. But any questions that I did not have time to answer, I will type up responses to all the questions and then send everyone who's registered the list of questions and answers so you can all have that after the webinar. Within 48 hours of this webinar, you're going to receive an email containing a link to the recording of this entire webinar. You can use this link to then view this lecture anytime, all or part of it, as many times as you wish. You should have received the lecture notes for this webinar in a previous email. You can use these as a guide and to take notes. If by chance you did not get the notes, you can go to the website PYOURS, that's PYOURS.com/notes, and you can download them right now from there. So it's PYOURS.com/notes, and that will have the PDF of today's lecture notes. I thought we'd kick off this whole presentation first with just some landscape shots before we zoom in on individual plants. This is a garden located in York, Maine, south of me in Kennebunk. It's a zone 5. This is a August shot of a garden that I thought just was a great example of a low maintenance sustainable garden. In the photo you can see there is some native eupatorium, Joe Pyeweed up here in full bloom with those pink umbrels. Another native over here by the fence, that's a feather reed grass called Carl Forster. Then we see some lavender blue sage, Russian sage, a clump of pink phlox that's highly mildew resistant. I'm going to show you some varieties shortly in this webinar. And then a big clump of good old coneflower to attract butterflies and other friendly pollinators. Here's a landscape in upper New Hampshire. This is in full sun on a rocky ledge. So imagine what a hell strip area this is. And these plants are thriving because they're the right plant in the right spot. And again, I'm going to show you a lot of these in the webinar. But in the back of the garden, you can see a sweep of, once again, that native featherweed grass. It's called Carl Forster. There's also a clump of a sweep of pink coneflower. Then those flat yellow flowers are yarrow, achillea. Then a big long stretch of white daylily with some white Shasta daisies in front. And then to the left of the screen, you see more yellow yarrow there, repeating the clumps that were in the back near the coneflowers. Again, this area would be more of a zone 4 garden in northern New Hampshire in full sun. Here's a photo of my garden in upstate New York before I moved from there. I lived on this property for 27 years outside of Saratoga Springs in the village of Boston Spa. This is a part sun garden. It's sited on the east side of my garden shed, so it gets sun all morning, but by 1 or 2 in the afternoon, the sun has gone over the shed and it's in full shade. So obviously I took this photo later in the afternoon when this garden was in shade. But you can see my style is just kind of a very natural cottage garden style. I use very little fertilizer, little water, a lot of native plants. I mean, that's what I talk about when I talk about sustainable gardening. I'm talking about plants that need very low input, which means not a lot of water, certainly no chemicals, low on fertilizer, pollinator friendly, and ideally low deer and rabbit browse. Here's another photo of my gardens in upstate New York. This is a zone 4-5 where I gardened in. This is one of my shade gardens. Shade gardening is my favorite type of gardening. This garden is located under a huge oak tree and several maple trees. The photo was taken in the spring, right after I mulched in this garden with a mulch that consisted of rotted horse manure as well as a lot of aged leaf mold, and I just spread it around all these plants after they had come up in order to feed my soil, reduce the weeds, reduce evaporation from my soil, and make a nice presentation for the bed as well. Another shot of that garden, those gardens in upstate New York. These gardens have been featured, as I said, in so many magazines. And, you know, I'm just a plant collector. I love to trial plants, evaluate them, and decide are they worthy plants? Are they superheroes for us to use in our landscapes? And you can see I certainly had a lot of plants to trial. This property, although it may look big, it's only 1/4 of an acre. It's 50 feet wide, by 200 feet long, so it's a postage stamp property, and I managed to garden a big chunk of it. So here's where I live now. We moved after living in upstate New York for 27 years. We bought this N-unit condominium in Kennebunk, Maine. I moved to Kennebunk to be closer to my family who are here. And this garden, this front and side garden is on obviously the front side of my condominium in Kennebunk. This is a zone 5 area where I garden. When I first bought the property, this is what it looked like. Yeah, it's a horror show, isn't it? I mean, when the real estate agent walked me up to this, it was very difficult to keep walking, but I knew we needed a unit that was single floor living because of our change of our family's lifestyle. So when I saw this huge viburnum and this beat up juniper, I just begged the homeowners association to allow me to remove them to create something that was a little bit more attractive. So with their blessing, the very first spring, we moved in December of 2013. The very first spring, that viburnum was ripped out. By the way, you probably didn't even notice that there was a porch behind that viburnum and juniper. So this is what was behind that ugly scene. So I planted this little garden. This photo was taken probably 3 weeks after I planted that garden using, quart-sized plants, half-gallon, gallon, a couple 3 gallons, trying to save my money and create a little happy display. And then this is it the second year. Yeah, I kept planting, didn't I? Kept moving around and starting to sweep around that condo. There was nothing there. And then when I saw there was woods nearby, of course, I had to launch myself over there and start gardening in that space. But even though for many, they look at this landscape and they assume that it's high maintenance, they couldn't be more wrong, because I believe, as I've said, in using superhero plants that work harder for me than I do for them, and also help the world around us as far as pollinators and everything else. So I want to be environmentally responsible, as I have beautiful gardens that are just a joy to be in. If I put in 1 to 2 hours a month on these gardens, that's a lot, because most of the time I'm on the road speaking. So now we're going to just start to zoom in on the specific plants spring through fall. And your handout that I provided for this presentation gives you everything you need to know. I gave you the name of the plant, the light conditions, when it blooms, how tall it gets, the zone range, the coldest zone that it can be in, any special notes as far as if it's deer, rabbit resistant, fragrant flowers. So you've got that great resource right at your fingertips to follow along on. So, and one other thing on your handout, if the plant tends to be low deer browse, I also put an asterisk by it. But as many of you know, deer can browse very differently in different parts of the country. So certainly check in with your local resources like your extension offices, master gardeners, and others that can tell you specifically what they tend to browse on in your region. So why am I showing this first plant, Dicentric Goldheart? Why is it a superhero? Well, compared to other early blooming bleeding hearts, which have green leaves, this variety called Goldheart have these, bright shimmering yellow leaves that just pop in the spring in shade. And especially if it's been a wicked cold winter, I couldn't be happier to see that display out in the shade garden. And then after it finishes blooming, it doesn't go dormant like most of the green leaf ones that get really shabby come summer heat and they just disappear on you. This one, Goldheart, will remain beautiful, give you those lacy leaves as a backdrop or companion planting with other perennials, annuals, or shrubs you have in your garden. Hellebores, these are the answer to me if you have shade and you want blasts of spring color that are not going to be gnawed on by deer and rabbit. So hellebores, Lenten rose, are really resistant to critter damage, very long-lived, very drought tolerant once established, and they're going to bloom for easily 6 weeks. And how many spring blooming bulbs can you name that will go straight for 6 weeks? Plus, with all the breeding going on now in this plant group, they're breeding for multi-petaled varieties like Amber Gem on the right, where you almost have a rose-like beautiful flower in the spring waking up and pleasing your eyes. And then on the left, Pink Frost is one of a number of hellebores now that are being bred so the flowers face outward or they face upward, so they're not just nodding where you can't appreciate their lovely stamens or the markings on the petals. You get these flowers that are looking out at you and just saying, hey, look at me and I'm making you happy. So really have a nice display because of the way the flowers are facing. Lungwort pulmonaria, great spring blooming native plant, but what struck me about this cultivar, Blue Ensign, is one, there are very few perennials that have this gentian blue, stunning color, and this one's going to bloom easily 6 weeks in the spring. Of course, deer and rabbit resistant. But the other bonus why I put it as a superhero perennial is that after it finishes blooming, it keeps a very clean, nice foliage. It doesn't tend to have the fungal diseases that many lungworts have where they get really shabby and ratty looking afterwards. This one has a lovely fresh green foliage right into the fall, so it's always looking good in that spot. Amsonia hubrechtii, commonly called Arkansas Blue Star. This is another native plant. It was a perennial of the year a few years ago. Any plant that is voted by the Perennial Plant Association as a perennial of the year must meet a number of requirements. But the most important to you and me would be, one, they must be easy to grow for many people across the United States. Two, they must have more than just one season of interest. So we can have flowers, but then it's also got to have really cool foliage, or maybe it's seed pods. It can't just be about one season. It must be at least 2 seasons of interest. And then three, the plant has to be pretty easily accessible at many garden centers across the country. It can't be a hard-to-find plant that's being nominated as a perennial of the year. So why did Amsonia get the vote? Well, you get these ice blue flowers in the spring on this lovely soft green willowy foliage, and then come fall, the foliage turns this shocking golden orange that I think will rival any ornamental grass. So you get this amazing display from a plant that rarely needs dividing and is a low water source plant. Epimedium, commonly called barrenwort. This is the answer if you're trying to garden in dry shade under maple trees and pine trees, where that is such a challenging spot for the plants to compete for water and nutrients. But let's say hello to Epimedium, because they can fight it out and do an amazing job in those stressful conditions. They come in a lot of different flower colors. They look like little delicate dancing butterflies, if you will. You can get them in white, pink, orange, yellow, bicolors. They all have these very sweet, elongated, heart-shaped leaves that have a burgundy marking and coloration to them in the cooler weather like spring or fall. And bonus here, they have an overlapping leaf habit that helps shade the soil so you don't have weeds that are jumping in between your ground cover, so you get this lovely carpet that keeps weeds out of your garden, plus you get the great spring display. Brunera, commonly called Siberian bugloss. This is another voted perennial of the year. The one that got the award is the one you see on the left of your screen. That's Jack Frost. Emerald Mist is on the right that has just those little flecks of silver on the heart-shaped leaf. These look like caladiums. That's the best way I can say it. You get this stunning mass of leaves that glow in the shade, and the bonus is you have forget-me-not blue flowers that just billow over these leaves in the spring. But once you shear off those flowers, the leaves actually get a little bit larger. So the energy goes more into those leaves, and you get a stunning plant that looks almost maybe even better than a hosta as far as the way it looks. And with the silver leaf varieties like Jack Frost, silver reflects light in low light areas, so it can be easily seen even in a dark, shadier area. Here we are in the spring. By the way, did you notice that a lot of the early blooming plants are shade plants? These are plants who get their business done as far as the flower and then seed production before the heavy leaf canopy comes in. So a lot of spring blooming plants are those that like less light, less sun. This one, a dianthus carnation, it was going to want full sun. It's going to step out into that hot sun. It needs really sharp drainage. It welcomes sandy soil, not clay soil. I picked this cultivar, Frosty Fire, because in my trialing experience, it's the longest blooming. It's got to be one of the very longest repeat blooming dianthus that I've ever trialed. Most of them just kind of give a heavy flush spring, early summer. Frosty Fire just keeps sending up new flowers right into August in the garden. And bonus, you get these steel blue leaves that give another layer of color to your gardens. And I want you all to notice as we go through these slides how many of the plants I'm showing you also have striking foliage, because every plant has to provide more interest for more months. That's what I want for these radical perennials. Non-stop color, no fuss, and sustainable as far as water and low fertilizer need. Millennium, Allium Millennium, I bet this is going to be picked next year as a perennial of the year. It's being voted on. Here it is in my garden in Maine. It's that little globes of those lavender purple flowers. What makes it so different than many alliums is it blooms weeks longer. It doesn't self-seed all over. It's got big, strappy, attractive foliage. It starts blooming, in, depending on your zone, in most gardens starting in early July, and it'll bloom a good part right through into August. And I want you to notice, we're going to be talking about designs in future webinars and all that, but I purposely put that purple-leafed coral bell right near that allium because I wanted to kind of color echo that purpley colors. And that coral bell that you see there, you're going to see it later in the presentation, that is one called Grape Expectations that has these gorgeous, huge purple leaves that do not fade out with summer heat, and they have this lovely silver veil that covers the leaves. So just a really striking one. You'll see it up close shortly. Mucdenia, this is a perennial. The one I'm talking about is the one that's the flat, low-lying one in the front of the screen that has these really fun shaped leaves. This is a perennial that can do well in part sun to part shade. I had mine in, this is not my photo, but I had mine in under my maple tree in upstate New York. In the spring, it has beautiful white lacy flowers that come up above those leaves. The leaves are totally green in spring and summer, but as the coolness of fall comes on, they start getting that burgundy red from the margins and starts moving towards the center of the leaf that just has, I think, a glorious traffic stopping display for the front of a garden. Virginia, you know, I came back from Ottawa where I was speaking for the Horticultural Society there, and I was going through a number of their beds, you know, in their horticultural display beds, and they use so much of this Virginia, commonly called pig squeak, in their gardens. This is a huge perennial, especially for English gardens as well, but for some reason it has not caught on the same way in the States. I can't figure it out because it has these really beautiful flowers in the spring that you see here. They can be white or pink, and the foliage itself is like big cabbage-like leaves, big waxy leaves. The leaves can be in different colors in the spring and summer, but then most of them turn a beautiful burgundy, rusty red in the fall. Highly drought tolerant, highly deer resistant. You get great flowers in the spring, and then very ornamental leaves for the rest of the season. Plus, they're deer resistant. Again, here I keep going about those leaves. Here's a native plant. This is Tiarella, commonly called foam flower. This is for shade. It can take part sun. But I'm not even showing you the flowers yet. You'll see them in the next slide. But look at those leaves. You tell me those aren't dazzling. I call these like perennial coleus. These are going to draw my eye to that garden and look lovely spring through fall and need very little water or fertilizer to make that display. In this photo, you can see two other varieties of foam flower, but now you're getting a sense of the flowers on these. The flowers can be white or pink. They emerge in the spring. They are a really important early nectar source for pollinators. You know, I talk about the leaves, but I know we need the flowers for the pollinators, but I'm also going to really push those leaves to add more drama to the color picture. But Jade Peacock is on your left, Sugar and Spice is on your right. Great plants for 3 seasons of interest with low input. Euphorbia, commonly called cushion spurge. These are going to be like poinsettia. They are really, the color that is attracting your eye is actually the leaves at the base of the small little flowers that turn a color at a certain time of the year. So it's really the foliage that's the striking thing. The flowers are tiny little yellow flowers you could hardly even see, but it's those lush, cool leaves that carry the display into fall, and these thrive in full sun and sandy, awful soil. So if you think you can't grow anything, welcome cushion spurge as long as you have sharp drainage. Ascot rainbows on the left, first blush is on the right. I have grown first blush for probably 10 years, and it's so neat. I never divide it. I love that pink, white, and green foliage. It's all about that. And one thing I do with many of my cushion spurge, regardless of the leaf color and the cultivar, is after they finish blooming in the spring, I will shear back all the stems by at least half their height. And what that does is it triggers all new foliage growth beneath the cut that makes it much fuller and mounded, so it doesn't look floppy and leggy like it can do after blooming if you do not shear it back by half their height. Stackies, this is another tough, loves the heat, loves dry soil, loves sandy soil. This is one called Humelo. It is a long blooming plant, has beautiful green, crinkly, spinach-like leaves, nice clump former, just adored by honeybees and other pollinators, and it's deer and rabbit resistant. Once again, with so many of these, especially when I'm talking about drought-tolerant, fast drainage, don't be fertilizing these things. They're used to lean soil. They don't need to be loved to death with lots of fertilizer. And if you're going to use fertilizer, and I do use some fertilizer, especially on my edibles, I'm always using an organic fertilizer like a product from Espoma, like Plantone or Hollytone, or a liquid organic fertilizer like Neptune's Harvest. I'm one of these prove it to me people. And so penstemon, beard tongue, was a perennial of the year a number of years back. It was called Husker's Red. Many of you probably know that one. Penstemon Husker's Red was a perennial of the year, I'm going to guess 10 years ago. And I was very underwhelmed by it. I felt that it flopped too much. The burgundy colored foliage in the spring quickly greened out by summer heat, and it had dirty white flowers that just did not impress. So when I trialed this one 2 years ago called Dark Towers, I was like, is it everything they're telling me that it's such a superior plant to Husker's Red? And I give it a gold medal. I was blown away by how gorgeous this plant was. Tubular flowers, hummingbirds love it. It has this chocolate burgundy foliage that looks beautiful spring right into summer. A little bit of greening in the heat of summer, but still has that tone of darker foliage. And then the flowers are a beautiful pink, not a wishy-washy white. So you get these great soft pink flowers for easily 6 weeks. Geranium Roseanne, this perennial is the most decorated perennial in all time right now as far as gold medals for performance. It was the first ever hardy geranium to be, sterile geranium to be entered into the market. That means it never goes to seed, which means if it's not putting energy into seed, it's just putting energy into more flowers, which makes you and me happy, not necessarily pollinators. So I always say, when I'm building my landscape, I'm always making sure I have a food source for pollinators spring, summer, and fall. But if I do want to tuck in a few of these to carry the color from June through October with no deadheading, I'm not going to feel guilty about doing that. So Geranium Roseanne is radically different than your pink and your white hardy geraniums because this one never stops the push for flowers. Of course, yarrow, another amazing plant, especially for butterflies. They love that flat landing pad. I used to consider a lot of the yarrows thuggish. I found them to flop too much. They spread too much all over the place until I started using some of these. And many of you may recognize on the left a Achillea called Moonshine. It has been around for a long time. I find the yellow ones like this one in Coronation Gold to be very tight, clump-forming, sturdy stemmed yarrows, and I love them, and I do use them, especially moonshine that has more of a silver cast to the foliage. But then the Seduction series of yarrows that you see on the right, that's an amazing group of yarrows. I call them the Seduction series. They come in 4 flower colors. The one you see here is called Strawberry Seduction. You can also get them in pink, yellow, and peach Seduction, but they have stiff stems, repeat blooms through the summer, and very tight clump-forming habit that slowly gets bigger from the base as time goes on. Here, I took this photo in front of my house here in Maine, and you can see this is a new yarrow, the yellow one you see there, called Little Moonshine. That's going to be in the markets this coming spring. It's being introduced by Blooms of Bressingham, and it's just Coronation Gold, shrink it down so it can go more towards the front of your border. And here I have it paired with a beautiful native aster called Blue Autumn. I took this photo in mid-August in my garden. Coreopsis tick seed, Mercury Rising is hands down one of the longest blooming tick seeds I've ever trialed. Many of us have yellow varieties of tick seed, and they're great. I love them. So do the pollinators. Understand it. But I've never seen anything bloom as long, as lushly as this one, Mercury Rising. It puts perennial Coreopsis like moonbeam to shame. I mean, this thing just keeps through September with these glowing pinkish red petals with bright yellow domes. It's just a winner. Another one that's very similar to this that's also good but stays a little shorter than Mercury Rising is one called Red Satin. Astilbe, great for shade. They also can be in full sun. Most people just assume shade, but you can use these in full sun. They will go through their bloom cycle faster in full sun, but they will still bloom in full sun, but they're going to want a little bit more of a moisture-retentive soil. They're not going to want a sandy soil, so you'd want to work in some compost or manure or some type of other organic matter into the planting area where you're using this. But I'm specifically pointing at this species of Astilbe. So when you go into our garden centers, where I work in garden centers, you are faced with a whole variety of different gorgeous Astilbe, but I'm specifically targeting the Astilbe in the Chinensis group. So you see the first word Astilbe, it's the second word I want you to pay attention to. It's usually, it is italicized. So this is the Chinensis species, so it's a subgroup of Astilbe called Chinensis. That means it is much more drought tolerant. It's much more able to deal with inconsistent rainfall than other varieties of Astilbe, like the Orenzii, that will start to crisp up an extended drought. The Chinensis varieties can tolerate that much better and handle that dry shade or slopes so much better than other varieties in the Astilbe family. The one on the right, Amber Moon, is probably one of my very favorites. Not only does it have beautiful pink-purple flowers in July, what I'm trying to point to is those shimmering yellow lacy leaves that have red rims to the leaves. The mounds of leaves themselves, before and after bloom, are as striking, I think, as the 3-foot-tall flowers in July, the purpley pink flowers that emerge from that striking foliage. I took the shot in front of my home where I took the Coreopsis Mercury Rising that I was just talking about it, and I swept some of that Astilbe called Amber Moon nearby so I could do what I call a color echo again in designing. I'm using the yellow leaves with a little bit of that burgundy flush on the rims to color echo the Coreopsis Mercury Rising that have the burgundy red petals with the yellow dome. So they're kind of they're relating to each other through that common color. Asclepias, certainly butterfly weed is so important. This native plant is the perennial of the year for 2017. It's the tuberosa on the left. That is, in 2017, has been selected as the winner of the year. And thank goodness, because it's so important to monarch butterflies, not just for their mature state as a butterfly, but also at their caterpillar stage for a food source, their leaves. And I always remind people, if orange isn't your thing, and you're like, I can't put an orange butterfly weed, Asclepias, in my garden. It doesn't go with my other flowers. Well, then turn yourself to Hello Yellow on the right. This is another butterfly weed that I've used for years in my gardens that has a really pretty yellow flower that does go with more colors if orange isn't yours. But at least you're going to be supporting butterflies. These are highly drought tolerant, long tap roots that go down for their water source. I took this photo actually on the High Line in New York City. I bet a number of you have seen it. If not, you've got to go. This is a bucket list public garden built on an old railway right over the streets in New York City. And here I was walking. I took this photo, and there's a sweep of orange butterfly weed you see in this photo. This is a beating hot, sunny area on a railroad track area in New York. Talk about tough love and a plant being able to thrive in that. And the pink flower you see, that's one of the Astilbe chinensis varieties I also showed you that's in full sun right next to that orange butterfly weed and able to thrive even in those extreme conditions. Here's another, hot-loving, sun-loving perennial native to the Midwest. This is commonly called wine cups or purple poppy mallow. Kalahari is the botanical name. This has these lovely mallow-like flowers that blooms through the summer. It thrives. It's like a rose. It just loves intense heat. So if you have an area in full sun near a sidewalk, you've got a lot of heat coming off your building, a retaining wall, a driveway, and you're melting at 4 in the afternoon in full sun in that heat, well, put in some wine cups because it's going to be dancing in that type of heat, and it's going to give you these lovely flowers. Catmint nepeta, another really important food source for our pollinators. A lot of breeding has been going on now to create catmints, nepeta, that are more compact and don't flap open like Walker's Low that's been out in the market for a while. Walker's Low, people had the misconception because of the name of the plant that it stayed low. But it gets 2 to 3 feet tall, and it's very prone to splitting open in the middle by midsummer, and that's not always a pretty scene. So now you have these newer varieties that I love. I've trialed these. Persian Blue on the bottom right, Select Blue on the top left. These are varieties that are actually been bred for slightly larger flowers, more compact habit, typically under 20 inches tall. A lot of these new cultivars are coming out that give you a really neat display right into the fall. Sometimes you may have to shear them back after the heavy flush. If they don't flower as heavily, give them a hard cut back to within 2-3 inches of the crown, of the base, and that will usually trigger a whole new round of flowers. Coneflowers, I could do a whole presentation on coneflowers, but I'm going to start off by saying I think there are a lot of great coneflowers out in the market. I think there are a lot of very junky coneflowers on the market. And what I mean by junk is I think genetically they're weak plants that I don't care how good a gardener you are, genetically they are short-lived. They just don't make it through one or more winters. They don't have it in them, so to speak. But the two I'm showing you on the screen are highly rated coneflowers that are great for repeat bloom, good branching habit, good overwintering. Cheyenne Spirit on the left is a seed-grown coneflower. Comes in all those different colors from different shades of yellow, orange, red. If you specifically want one color, and that's the color you want, you need to buy it in flower because you cannot tell until it goes into flower what color it's going to be because it's a seed mix. The one on the right, Milkshake, is one of the crested coneflowers. Some people think of it too much as the eyeball plant. I like it. I found it amazing in my garden. It just bloomed for months. But one thing I need to say about any of these crested coneflowers, these double flowering or crested varieties, they are not your first choice for pollinators. So if you're just going to use coneflowers, I make sure I use a mix of them, those that have single petals like Cheyenne Spirit, and then you can always toss in some of the crested. What has happened with a lot of the crested or doubles is that the stamens of these have actually modified, have morphed, if you will, into petals. So now we're losing a lot of that nectar, pollen benefit from the flower. Here's one I want you all to start looking for. I'm looking more and more for the native coneflowers. This one I grew for so many years in upstate New York. still there. I moved here. But this is one called Rocky Top. It's a different species. It's Tennesseeensis. And it's got a very skinny, open petaled habit. I like that because it's got long stems and they just dance. It's not a heavy look. They move in the wind. They provide that artwork, dancing artwork in the breeze. But I do point out, you can kind of see it in the bottom photo, this is a coneflower that what I refer to as a facer plant, which means the flower is going to face in the direction of the most intense sun, and that's usually your southern or your western exposure. So like many daylilies, they're going to turn their face in the direction of the more intense sun. So when you plant them in your garden, make sure you're planting them so they face you and not your neighbor, all right? Because this is your garden. They can come over and enjoy it in your yard. But remember to kind of site them where that flower is going to be facing in the direction that you normally are enjoying it from. Another cool coneflower. This is one I haven't grown yet. I will. But this one is commonly called Ozark coneflower. And by the way, people say, well, where can I get my hands on these great plants? Well, most of the plants I've been showing you, I have seen at garden centers where I've been traveling around in all of my speaking engagements around the Midwest and the East Coast. You can also Google resources. A lot of these are also available by seed. So there's a lot of ways. We know if we're gardeners and we want something, we can Google, we can find a resource for them. So don't be dismayed if you think they're not out there. There are sources for these, otherwise I wouldn't be mentioning them. Calamintha, another so underused perennial that is ideal for hot, sunny, sandy locations. I took this picture in the garden I showed you in Upper New Hampshire on those rocky ledges. This is another area of the gardens, and they had this calamintha, that's that white feathery plant in the backdrop, planted with sweeps of silver lamb's ear in front of it. Calamintha wants as much heat and sun and fast draining soil that you can give it, and it'll reward you with this lovely flower that the bees and other pollinators just love. It's got great fragrant foliage, and as you can guess, because of that fragrant foliage, also is highly deer resistant. I said I was going to show you another coral bell that I placed next to the base of the Allium millennium earlier. This is, on the left, is this coral bell called Great Expectations. I have to give this probably one of my top 5 I've ever trialed. It is one of the biggest mounds of leaves that looks so attractive right until fall. It never looked crispy. It has this amazing presentation with lovely pink flowers. So it's not a wishy-washy one. And then your right is another one that I just loved in my trialing called Berry Timeless. Deeper pink flower. Once again, just repeat blooms of these great flowers, and the big leaves have a silver veil, so it's a green leaf with a very pretty silver marking over the leaf. Any coral bells, I don't care what color they are, I tend to go more towards the pink or the red flowering varieties, but any coral bell is going to be a magnet for hummingbirds. They love these flowers. Heucherella, closely related to heuchera, coral bells. This perennial is a cross between coral bells, heuchera, and foam flowers, Tiarella, and we got this new genus called Heucherella. And it really blends the best, I think, of both families. So now we have striking, large leaves, big mounds, beautiful flowers for pollinators. And these are very tolerant of a range of light conditions. From zone 6 or colder, I don't think I'd do the 7, but 6 or colder, they will do equally well in full sun or shade. So they're very flexible plants. Plus, we get these great flowers that are going to benefit the pollinators. Daylilies, unless you've really got deer pressure, daylilies are great because they're so superhero plants. They need so little water, so little fertilizer. They don't need a lot of input, and they will reward you with these cheerful flowers. You know, I salute Stella Diora that many of us have or have had, that little golden orange yellow flower. Stella was the very first repeat blooming daylily to come to market, 40 years ago. So she would send up just not one round of stems with flowers on it. A second round of stems with flowers would follow later in the season. That's what we mean by repeat blooming or re-blooming daylilies. But Stella developed a bad habit. She started to just go into heavy seed formation after the first flush in the spring, and then we were left with a lot of big, swollen, acorn-looking seed heads on top of stems, and it just kind of was an ugly scene until it finally started to rebloom later in the summer in the cool of the fall. A lot of these new ones like blackthorn on your left and going bananas on the right, these have been bred to have much more consistent reblooming habit without putting a lot of energy into seed production, which means they're rewarding us with more flows of ever-blooming flowers, larger flowers, more striking markings. A lot of these are much more fragrant. Believe it or not, Stella Diora is listed as a fragrant daylily. I mean, you have to stuff your nose down into the throat of that daylily to even use your imagination to think there's a fragrance on Stella Diora. Lavender. Lavender has been frustrating for many gardeners in colder zones because we crave lavender, right? I mean, I've always gardened in zone 4 or 5. Most lavenders are only hardy to 5, many only to zone 6. They need sharp drainage. They hate clay soil. And for many of us in at least colder zones, these come through the winter looking really shabby if they come through the winter at all. But I tell you, phenomenal. This cultivar is making a whole new scene in the industry for us because it's been bred to be one zone colder than hardier, should I say, than other lavenders. So it's hardy to zone 4. It's much fuller and larger than other varieties like Munstead and Hidcote. And it's a different species. It's actually a cross. It's not in the Augustifolia species like Munstead and some of the others. This one just tends to tolerate more moisture than others, comes through winters looking more robust. So especially for those of us in the colder zones, I'm really encouraging you to use Phenomenal as your lavender choice versus some of the other cultivars out there. I love baby's breath. I love how it looks in flower arrangements and all that. But most of the older baby's breath that have been on the market really bloom well for maybe 3-4 weeks, and then you kind of have these dirty, spent-looking flowers on these big balls of foliage. Well, I was so struck by this cultivar called Festival Star. We started carrying it at the garden center I was working at a couple of years ago, and as I kept going by the bench at the garden center where these were, and it never stopped blooming, sitting in a pot on top of a bench, July and August with no deadheading. It certainly snapped me to attention about this is one heck of a plant. It can take intense heat, little water, and have these frothy, delicate white flowers right through the summer. A great choice, especially for the front of the garden because it stays very short and compact. Russian sage, another winner, especially for late season interests. So many gardens look pretty spent by August. You know, the heat is taking its toll. They don't have the same pizzazz as the spring and early summer gardens. So we need to introduce more of this variety, Russian sage, Perovskia, into our beds because these are in peak performance in the month of August. They thrive in heat. They love that dry soil. They can take the humidity. And now the new direction in this plant family is to breed for a more compact, dense flowering Russian sage, so you get this fuller appearance. They don't look so wispy and hard to see, especially from a distance. So denim and lace is another one of those great choices that has come out in the last year that provide a more compact, flashier, if you will, Russian sage. Ice plant, Delosperma, this perennial really came more from the West Coast, a big movement of water conservation. So we're here in the Midwest, East Coast, as we're being hit with intense droughts in many areas, certainly here in Maine, we're looking more and more to plants like Delosperma that need very little water. They have those succulent leaves that just hold on to water as a resource. Delosperma, ice plant, have these flattened like daisy flowers. They come in a lot of different colors. Fire spinner on the top tends to be the one that flies out of the garden center first because people are shocked by the flower color. It's so fun, so blingy, if you will. But fire spinner only really blooms for maybe 5 weeks, late spring, early summer, whereas varieties like lavender ice keep powering on right through the summer. So maybe lavender ice doesn't have the eye candy of fire spinner, But I tell you what, lavender ice will keep going weeks longer as far as bloom. So maybe you combine the two or other varieties, as I said, of ice plant. Agastaki, hyssop, another top one for especially honeybees. You know, as we're all trying to help the bees, especially by not using all these chemicals. This one, Blue Fortune, is the hardiest of all the varieties. This one is hardy to zone 4. Most varieties of hyssop on the market, and these other colors I'm going to show you shortly, are only hardy to zone 5, if not zone 6. So Blue Fortune, for those of us in colder zones, me, zone 5, 4, we're going to be looking for this one. On the right, I thought it was a great photo, Compliments of Garden Designs, where they mix the round ball-shaped flowers of Echinops, globe thistle with the hyssop. So now we get this really kind of echo of a blue-purple, but in different flower shapes. But both flowers can take intense heat in dry soil conditions. Here's an Agastaki that's going to want a warmer climate. This is zone 5, even to zone 6. Any Agastaki are going to need very fast draining soil. So let me mention this before I forget. I'm watching my time here. Whenever I'm talking about these plants, these perennials that need very sharp drainage, they do not want to be sitting in wet soil. For those of us and you, everyone out there, who tend to have a lot of snow in the winter, and I know some of you are chuckling because you don't get any, good for you, or whatever, but for those of us who do get a lot of snow, you would never want to place plants like Agastaki or others that need sharp drainage in areas where you're piling snow in the winter, or where you have snow coming off your roofs, or being snow blown by your snowblower, or being plowed by the plow, where you have huge piles of snow that take forever to melt in the spring. Now you've got really long time for the soil to be wet and not to dry out, and that's just death for these plants that need sharp drainage. So think about that if you do get a lot of snow in the winter, not to be putting plants like this in areas where you tend to have a lot of snow buildup. Gosh, garden phlox, they're a backbone for the summer border. I mean, they're just such a traditional great plant. But I'm going to insist on garden phlox that are not prone to powdery mildew, that have that white stuff all over the leaves. So, for instance, this one, which also has really fun leaves, this is Nora Lee, that has been out for years. Wonderful soft pink flower with a pronounced pink center. Great fragrance, highly mildew-resistant leaves. I took this photo this past summer at the end of August on Mackinac Island in northern Michigan. So this was taken probably August 28th. You don't see a spot of powdery mildew on those leaves, and you have that amazing performance of flowers. Here are two more highly mildew-resistant, amazing flowering summer blooming phlox for the border. Glamour Girl is on the left. This one is pretty recent, the last 2 years hitting our market. Really striking rosy pink flowers that bloom for a long time, very dense habit of the flowers. And on your right is a cross between what they believe to be, I think this was discovered at Chicago Botanic Gardens, a cross between Phlox David, a very mildew-resistant white phlox, and one called Ebaculum that is a bicolor pink one. And Shortwood has this stunning display of a kind of a medium pink flower that gives you long blooms with high mildew resistance. You know, moving to the wet area, so if you have an area where it's wet, or you want to help stop water runoff from driveways, from parking lots, where you want a great filtration system for the water that's running off, certainly ligularias would be a top pick for that. This is a new variety that we'll be seeing this coming spring at garden centers called King Kong. It has massive heart-shaped, scallop-shaped leaves with orangey yellow daisy-like flowers at the end of July and August. This would be in some ways similar to Britt Marie Crawford or Othella, Desdemona, but the leaves are so much bigger. So 16 inches across. This is just a huge tropical-looking plant that thrives in wet areas. In general, the larger the leaf of the plant, the more moisture it needs because it's losing so much water through the leaves, it needs to recover it through the roots. Another plant for wet areas, and we're using a lot of this now, a lot of different cultivars at garden centers because we're recognizing the importance of bog gardening, and especially capturing runoff that is coming racing down off of slopes, hard surfaces, so that we can capture that water, stop it from running into storm drains, and allow a filtration system. This is a perennial commonly called Rogers flower, Rogersia. Big, huge, tropical leaves. On the left is a photo of a garden I took outside of Boston, Mass. This is in a wet area, in a shady area of her garden. The white pinkish plumes are the July flowers. So it's got almost like a stilby plumes that come up either in white or pink in late spring, early summer. The flower on the right is, the foliage on the right is a different variety, actually, of Rogers flower. That's probably chocolate wings that has that coppery bronze leaf when it first emerges, and then it starts to go green foliage by the heat of summer, but once again still has those big plumes that emerge off those leaves in the summertime. Black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia, great native plant. But, I always say but, again, these are my superheroes, my remarkable perennials. This variety is the one I'm tending to go to more than the one that is commonly sold called Gold Sturm. I bet a lot of you have Gold Sturm in your gardens, the bright yellow flower and the nice crunchy dark green leaves. The problem, or the issue maybe I have with Gold Sturm, is that for many people it's being more and more prone to black fungal disease on its leaves, so it gets those black spots as the summer goes on. It just doesn't look really pretty. The second thing with Gold Sturm is it can be a pretty fast spreader, especially if you have richer soil, and it can take to a bit of self-seeding. This variety of Rudbeckia is just a different species. It's called Little Henry. There's also a cultivar called Henry Eilers that's very similar, just gets a little taller. But I love this one because it's got those skinny little petals with quilled ends. It blooms for weeks and weeks, just like the other Rudbeckias, but it doesn't spread as fast. I think it's airier looking. It adds more movement to the garden in the border, and it's got that silver gray leaf that's so pretty. And it gets a common name, sweet coneflower, because the foliage is actually fragrant. That's how it got the nickname sweet coneflower. Certainly grasses, and I'm going to say specifically native grasses are so important in our landscape. This is a little bluestem. A lot of the bluestem grasses are now being bred to have a more erect, upright habit without flopping. So this one's called smoke signal. All of the bluestem grasses have that steely blue skinny blade, and as the summer goes on they develop more and more of a rosy purple tint on the top of the blade, and then these frothy white flowers later summer into the fall. Those flowers become seeds that are just adored by the birds, especially songbirds. Couple more grasses. On the left is a dwarf grass, more and more breeding now for compact, smaller grasses for use in smaller spaces or containers. This is a pennisetum called Burgundy Bunny. Little tiny thing with tufts, blooms in the summer. I love the fact that it's got that burgundy red tint to the blade, so it's a nice bicolor blade grass that give you these nice little flowers through the summer and fall. On the right, panicum, that's a native grass. Panicums are native. Neat thing about any of the panicum ornamental grasses is that they tend to be very upright, very narrow growing. So if you have tight spaces where you can't it doesn't fit a vase shape, a big wide grass to fit in that space, you need to look for varieties like panicum, or what I just showed you before, the bluestem grasses that can stay nice and upright, clean, good posture, and then have these frothy white flowers late summer that are once again adored by birds. Carex, a lot of people think of them as grasses. Technically, this is not a grass. This is a sedge. And on the left, both of these I've loved in my gardens. On the left is one called banana boat. Very short, really fat blade compared to others so it's chartreuse with that green margin. You really don't buy these for the flowers. This is really about that funky gray foliage. They can typically take a wetter area, more shade. On the right is one of the very skinny bladed carex called Bowles Golden. Really, really brilliant yellow, skinny little blades that really glow, especially in a shade or a part sun area. It just pops in that kind of light. Aurelia, I'm going to guess this is going to get the award of the perennial of the year probably in 2-3 years. You're going to see this one come out with that honor. This is a plant that can do equally well in part sun to shade. It has these glowing arching stems with these flowers. The stems are actually cinnamon red. It has feathery white plumes in August that become blue-black berries in the fall. So you get this real big presence. Almost gives you the sensation that it's a shrub because of how much it fills and grows on so fast. But then it goes totally dormant by fall. Disappears. So it's a great plant for using where you're, say, by a foundation of a house where you have a lot of snow or ice slamming off the roof, so you can't have a shrub that would get smashed by that in winter damage. Here you can put Aurelia Sun King in that spot. It fills out quickly, gives you the feeling that it's a shrub, but then it ducks underground in late fall, and who cares how much snow and ice comes pounding down on it. Certainly hosta have to be considered a tough radical perennial. I'm showing you these two because I think we need to think more about using hosta that have fragrant flowers in areas where you have entertainment space or decks or entranceways. Fragrant blue on the left and guacamole on the right have white or soft violet, soft lavender flowers that are so fragrant. They're like nature's airway. They just perfume up where you're planting them. So these are ideal to tuck in those lower light areas where you want to add that additional layer of beauty, if you will, to the gardens. Actea, formerly Cimicifuga. This cultivar I'm showing you is Hillside Black Beauty. You can get this plant in either green leaf varieties or chocolate leaf varieties. The difference in other than the foliage color, is the chocolate leaf varieties like this one, Hillside Black Beauty, has highly fragrant vanilla scented flowers in August through the fall. So these bloom late season, high incredible perfume to the flower. I'm going to say they're almost as fragrant as a oriental lily, like Casablanca or Stargazer. So they're just, wow, they're adding that layer of fragrance. And then they're swarmed by honeybees and other pollinators that just are going after that nectar. Certainly, I mentioned a few grasses earlier. This is a clump-forming grass for shade. This is commonly called Hakone grass or Japanese forest grass. Very short grasses. They're not going to top off, 2 feet maximum. They have a sweeping, cascading habit. They come in many different blade colors. This was one that was a perennial of the year a few years ago called Aureola. Easy to divide, to sweep around. They look great tucked alongside hosta, or in this case behind it you see another bugbane that I showed you just before with a white fragrant flowers, and on the right of that clump is actually a geranium roseanne, and geranium roseanne is also pretty good in a dappled-like condition. Again, now moving to the fall, this is a native perennial that is really getting a lot of attention, especially to partner with sedums because of that change in texture of foliage. This is a perennial commonly called narrow-leaf ironweed, Vernonia. It is eye-catching from spring through fall. I mean, look at that mound of soft, feathery foliage. That's what you get spring and summer. And then come August, you get these pinky purple flowers that are mobbed again by pollinators, your butterflies. So you get this great display that's low water, low fertilizer, and as I said, a native plant. And then you pair that with these big succulent leaves of sedum, and you just have a great combo of foliage playing off each other as well as pollinator-friendly plants. On the left is a relatively new sedum coming out called Frosted Fire. Autumn Joy was one of the great parents down the road to getting this one, but Frosted Fire has that bicolor leaf with more of a blue-green center to it and a softer pink flower head in the fall. And a lot more sedums are being introduced now as ground covers or prostate mounded varieties to be used as lawn alternatives or in really hell strip areas, say between a sidewalk and a road. These can just take a lot of stress and still look great, especially with all the new foliage colors and textures we're getting in this plant family, and then the bonus of late season color flowers for both our enjoyment as well as for pollinators. I took this shot. Actually, this was in the garden you saw in the very beginning in York, Maine. I was walking along, and I thought this was just great show. This was taken in early August in this garden, and I love the way they use sedum autumn joy, the broccoli plant, as my son calls it. That's the green one. And they paired it with the purple leaf variety called Purple Emperor there. That's the one that has the rosy purpley flowers that's starting to color up earlier. But just foliage alone, I think that makes an incredible presentation. It's almost like who needs the flowers? And finally, the last perennial for our fall encore. This is Tricertus, commonly called toad lily. These are distantly related to the orchid family. You can kind of see the resemblance as you look at the flower. These come in a lot of different flower colors, from white, yellow, pinks, purples, bicolors. They mostly go into bloom late summer, although there are some summer blooming varieties of this. They flower down the stem length, on these arching stems, so they're like cascading flowers down the stem. They're one of the few perennials that start blooming in the shade in fall. As I mentioned to you earlier, most shade blooming plants are blooming spring, early summer, as they're taking advantage of the light before the heavy tree canopy comes in. This is one that doesn't start the parade of flowers until August, and then it's going into fall. Now, before I jump into questions and answers, I did want to say thank you and ask for your support for these great companies that donated a bunch of door prizes, including Bluestone Perennials, who is the sponsor of this. You're seeing a list of these. Every one of you who are winners out there, I'm going to draw the winners right after this from the group of people who registered for this. If you are a winner, you are going to be contacted via email. I'll be emailing you to let you know what you win, which of these you won, and then, of course, your shipping address so I can get your goodie prize to you. So, again, support these businesses, and hopefully you're going to get an email from me very shortly saying you're a winner of one of these. I also wanted to make you aware of a special discount offer I'm offering on my books and my calendar for people who are registered for Radical Perennials. These are the 3 books I've written. On the top left is my recent book, all about, it's called The Right Size Flower Garden, all about how we can have amazing color, longer color in our landscape with 50% less work and much lower input, less water, less fertilizer, lower diagrams, more pollinator, native friendly, everything I want to do so that I have a landscape that not only looks beautiful, improves property value, but also blesses, the world around us. The middle book, The Ultimate Flower Gardener's Book, this is the first book I ever wrote. This is a heavy-duty resource of lists and lists of hundreds of plants for sun and shade, and it's the only book that I went extensively into top 10 ways of caring for your garden. So, for instance, top 10 ways to weed your garden, top 10 ways to conserve water, top 10 organic fertilizers, top 10 ways to prune your shrubs, how to do your soil pH, how to divide plants, what to do when. So that's that book. And on the right, top 10 list for beautiful shade gardens, that book is just all about gardening in shade. Hundreds and hundreds of plants, including bulbs, climbing vines, ornamental trees, and how you create an eye-popping display either in a container or in the landscape in low light. And finally, the 2017 Right Size Flower Garden Calendar. This is the second year I've been doing these calendars. These are calendars that are, of course, filled with gorgeous pictures of flowers and gardens. But in addition, each month has a list of tips about what you might be thinking about you should be doing as far as maintenance in your garden, kind of that gentle reminder, hey, you should be pruning your spring flowering shrubs now, or hey, this is a time to do your soil pH to do this, or hey, this is a better plant for pollinators than what you have been using. So each month has timely tips and plant recommendations. The 2017 calendar is a tribute to national botanic gardens and arboretums across our country. Each month features a botanic garden, salutes them, talks about them, and encourage you obviously to visit them. The cover that you see there, that's actually Chanticleer on the cover, an outstanding public garden outside of Philadelphia. As far as this discount, my special order offer, as you see there on your slide, you're also getting an email afterward with this code. That's the code you would put in, RADWEB27, into the order page when it asks for the coupon code. It will give you a discount off the regular price, so that any book that you see on the screen will be shipped for $18.50, including shipping, sign, and the calendar, which is usually $14.99, will be shipped for a total of $14.50. This offer is only available through October 31st, and then it's back to regular pricing, which is still good. But if you want to get a deal, hey, great holiday gifts, use that code and order by October 31st. So now I want to get into some of those Q&As that I said I would do. Now, I've only got 10 minutes where I'm watching my time, and if you're still sitting there with me, I want to make sure I use the time well. So I'm going to look over here and look at a few of these questions. And so here's one, because I've dealt with this. I just have to mention. So I've been mentioning these certain plants need sharp drainage. Well, not uncommon for me to be saying that, because I'm talking about low water use, and many plants who need sharp drainage are low water use. This person's asking, but what if I have clay? How can I get my hands and use these on these plants and use them in my gardens? Well, I used to have heavy clay in upstate New York, where I gardened for 27 years. So I know a lot of the tricks. And here are a few of the tricks to use drought-tolerant plants where you don't have good drainage. One, you can actually just mound up the soil, add some compost manure to that space where you have heavier clay, where you want to break up the airspace. So you can add some organic matter and gently mound the soil and plant the plant on the mound. Once it starts once it starts blooming and filling out, you're not even going to notice the slight elevation that's going to allow a faster drainage off those roots. If you have a slope, use those really drought-tolerant plants on the top of the slope if you have heavier soil. So at least the water is quickly draining off those roots. Another trick of how to do that. Again, I'm looking at so many questions here, so I want to make sure I get to as many as I can in the few minutes I have. Are there any shorter versions of the Actea, the one I called Cimicifuga, that I can use? Most varieties of Actea, those ones that have the long candlestick white flowers, most varieties of that native plant get 4 to 5 feet or taller. But here's the good news. There's a newer variety that came out called Chocoholic, chocolate leaves, white flowers, and it only gets 2 to 3 feet tall. So you can use it in a smaller space, or it's fantastic in a container because you get those lovely chocolate leaves spring and summer, and then it pops up with those fragrant white flowers in the fall. All right, I'm looking here. Hold on, or another. I just saw one. How do you get rid of powdery mildew, even if it's resistant, if the phlox was resistant to it, was affected? Well, a number of plants are prone to powdery mildew, and I could do a whole thing. I will be doing a whole thing on garden care and ways to deal with different issues over the season. But some of the things you can do with powdery mildew is, one, make sure you have good airflow to reduce the problem of powdery mildew. Make sure you have good airflow around those leaves so that the fungal spores that cause powdery mildew that are in your soil that get splashed up or blown up on the leaves of plants that get it, which are plants prone to that would be bee balm, phlox, sunflower heliopsis. I mean, gosh, there's a lot. Like even lilacs have a different variety of it. But to allow good airflow so the spores are taken away and aren't just sitting there at the base of the plant, kind of blown and just sitting on the lower leaves, where typically the problem is first found and then it quickly spreads upright. Here are a few things you can do to prevent it. If you know you've got a phlox or a plant that tends to, by July, start showing the signs of powdery mildew, you can use a fungal, antifungal type of spray, an organic one that's neem. Many of you have heard of neem, N-E-E-M as in Mary. This is a spray that is both a spray to use to prevent fungal diseases. You spray it on the leaves, but it also is a miticide, so it also deals with insect issues. Another thing you can do, and this was actually written up by Horticulture Magazine, is use a mix of milk and water. Yeah, you heard me right, milk and water. And the combination has been found to be very good about preventing fungal spores from germinating and spreading on the leaves. The general recommendation is to use whole milk, homogenized milk, versus skim or low fat, because the fat in the milk helps to adhere to the leaves longer, like a horticultural oil. So by using homogenized milk and water is the best recipe. As far as the actual amount of each, you'll see different versions out there if you Google it. But I generally see the most often recommended is 2 parts water to 1 part milk. So take 2 cups of water, mix it with 1 cup of milk, put it in a mister bottle. You can add, if you want, a tablespoon or whatever of vegetable oil if you want a little bit more of an adherent. Shake it up and spray the upper and lower surfaces of your leaf with this spray in June, before you even see the problem. I want to make sure to put that next slide up. Before you even see the problem, you should be spraying. This is a preventative way. Same thing with neem or serenade, which is another organic fungal spray you can use. And by the way, that recipe of milk and water, Horticulture Magazine also did a piece that showed in their research gardens that it also was a great deer deterrent. So by spraying leaves of hosta with milk and water, the spray, and other plants that tend to be highly targeted, they found a dramatic drop in munching on the leaves by deer and other critters. I mean, who knows? Maybe they don't like milk. All right, I'm going to probably take one more question, because remember, you're all going to be able to get my answers afterwards. Hold on. I'm trying. I'm looking for one that I think is the most. Hold on. Let me look at anything else. This is a great one. How do you get autumn joy sedum from splitting down the middle? Now, we all know, you know that look, right? It doesn't just happen to autumn joy, where by late summer, those big broccoli plants, sedum, is just splitting wide open, just looks awful. So this is how you do it. One, they're going to do better if you put them in full sun. The less sun you give them, the more likely they're going to get longer legged, and then that weight of the flower pulls those stems open. So it tends to happen less when sedum is in full sun versus lower light. The other thing you can do that works tremendously, and I do it on many of my fall blooming plants and some others, I'll be covering this in my garden care series, but is you can pinch the sedum back, the stems of the sedum back in early July. So let's say first week or so of July, second week, go out there, and even though they're starting to form those little flowers, don't be upset, don't get worried about it, just go and pinch each one of those stems back by at least half their length. Just do it. Snip, snip, snip. Make it a little, if you want, a little rounded look, but snip them back by at least half their length. And then what's going to happen is they're going to start side branching, shooting new stems, and you're going to have more flowers on shorter stems that are not going to flop open, and it makes us all happy. Even the pollinators, they don't have to try to figure out how to get to the flowers because they're lying on the ground. All right, at this point, we have been here for, an hour and 20 minutes, and I wanted to just give a high five out there to hopefully join me for my next lecture on January 26th on inspirational design lessons. You will all be getting an email right after this within 48 hours, and it's going to be also including a brief survey, 3-4 questions on how I can make this webinar better for you. It's also going to ask you for topics. You know what? I should turn on my little webcam so I can say goodbye to you. It's also going to ask you for questions. What topics do you want me to talk on? And any other tips you can give me.